He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody, it is Monday, April 21st, 2025, the 92nd day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. I hope you all had a wonderful Easter holiday. I know that I did, and it seems like President Trump did. And it's continuing here into this Easter Monday with a massive Easter egg roll at the White House. I guess there's something like 40,000 people attending. That seems like an insane number, but that's what's being reported. And great. The People's House is open again. Donald Trump has made it very clear that that's been his intention for quite a long time. He came out and gave a little Easter address for a few minutes and said some really interesting things. So I figured we might as well start off with that.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and a very happy Easter to everyone. It was a beautiful day yesterday, and it's a beautiful day today. We don't have to worry about sunburn, but looks like it's not going to be raining. It's going to be really something special. 40,000, 42,000 people are expected all throughout the day, and it's an honor to have you. I just signed an executive order putting the flags of our country, all of them, all federal flags and state flags, at half-mast in honor of Pope Francis. So he was a good man, worked hard. He loved the world, and it's an honor to do that. I want to thank everybody for being here. This is some band. I've heard this band actually indirectly for 4 years and very directly now for 4.5. And I like the direct method even better. But the Marine Corps band is very, very special. Thank you very much. What a great job. Thank you. Thank you. I also want to thank the National Park Service, the job they do in making everything so beautiful and spiffy. And I'm very difficult when it comes to that. I will tell you, very, very difficult. And I say they have done an incredible job. You just have to look around and see. And I just want to give a special thank you to our great First Lady who organized this entire event. She worked very, very hard on it. She worked very hard. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm working on the egg roll." I said, "That sounds like a lot of fun." And we're going to have a lot of fun in just a couple of minutes. But again, our country is doing very well. We had the highest number of recruits, enlistments that we've had in, I think, 28 or 29 years, and I'm sure we're going to actually beat that number. It's all happened. Since November 5th, it's all happened. Enrollment in the military is at a record, and enrollment in the police force, fire forces, and all of the different law enforcement groups. We're setting records, and 6 months ago, we couldn't get anybody. And now we're setting records. That's sort of testament to what's happening in terms of the spirit of our country. We love our country, and it's been something very, very special. And speaking of special, Easter is special, and it's one of our favorite days. It's one of our favorite periods of time. We're honoring Jesus Christ, and we're going to honor Jesus Christ very powerfully throughout our lives, all throughout our lives, not just now, all throughout our lives. we're bringing religion back in America. We're bringing a lot of things back, but religion is coming back to America. That's why you see the kind of numbers that you're seeing, the spirit and the kind of numbers that you're seeing. So we're going to come down and join you right now, but I just want to wish everybody once again, Happy Easter, and enjoy your lives. We're going to have a great 4 years. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Happy Easter and enjoy your lives. We're going to have a great 4 years. He's mentioning Jesus Christ by name, which I think is significant, particularly with how many of our religious holidays have been turned into, you know, the cliched thing is to call them Hallmark holidays, but they've been very corporatized and very, I don't know, nullified in some way by the material aspects of all of these holidays. And, you know, some of the imagery that a lot of people refer to, I think rightly, as in a pagan lineage. And it's good to see the point of the holiday being put right to the fore, as he has done many times in the past with Christmas. So I think it's reflective in many of his statements over the weekend. He's made it clear in each one of them, or in almost all of them, as we'll see in a second, that is front and center. He also had another really funny comment from the event today that I want to share. I think, actually, you know what? I should have thought to do this. When Joe Biden got taken away by the Easter Bunny, here it is. Oh, man. Kicking myself for not thinking, oh, you know what? We should show that too. But here we are.
Pakistan should not, and Afghanistan should be.
Oh, the Easter Bunny, Mr. President.
So you got a female Easter Bunny there. I don't know if that's a trans thing. I mean, they had trannies with their tits out at the Easter event last year for Biden. So, or at least, was that Easter? I think that was Easter. Anyhow, here's Trump today remarking on that momentous occasion.
You having a good time, everybody? Everybody having a good time? Do you remember the bunny with Joe Biden? Remember? Do you remember when the bunny took Joe Biden out? He's not taking Trump out. Anyway, that was a beautiful moment when the bunny saved Joe Biden.
That was a beautiful moment when the bunny saved Joe Biden. Wonderful. Hilarious. So, as I said, Donald Trump posted about Easter multiple times. Here is one of those. Melania and I would like to wish everyone a very happy Easter. Whether you are heading out to church or watching service from home, may this day be full of peace and joy for all who celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He is risen. Very well. That's very well stated. That's the nice Easter post. Here is the Trump classic Easter post, because you know you got to get one of those in. Happy Easter to all, including the radical left lunatics who are fighting and scheming so hard to bring murderers, drug lords, dangerous prisoners, the mentally insane and well-known MS-13 gang members and wife beaters back into our country. Happy Easter also to the weak and ineffective judges and law enforcement officials who are allowing this sinister attack on our nation to continue, an attack so violent that it will never be forgotten. Sleepy Joe Biden purposefully allowed millions of criminals to enter our country, totally unvetted and unchecked, through an open borders policy that will go down in history as the single most calamitous act ever perpetrated on America. He was, by far, our worst and most incompetent president, a man who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. But to him and to the person that ran and manipulated the auto pen, perhaps our real president, and to all of the people who cheated in the 2020 presidential election in order to get this highly destructive moron elected, I wish you, with great love, sincerity, and affection, a very happy Easter. So, happy Easter to the people celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and happy Easter to the people absolutely destroying the United States of America and who did destroy the United States of America over the last 4 years, most particularly whoever it was running Joe Biden's auto pen. And that would have been the real president. And I wonder if he's referring to himself. Very funny stuff. And when you're talking about the real president, we know Joe Biden was a fake one. People are still like, oh, well, you're going too far. Been saying it for 5 years, 4.5 years. It's been true for 4.5 years. The guy was not a real president. He wasn't elected. He wasn't properly certified. He wasn't properly inaugurated. And he didn't do the job. He wasn't commander-in-chief of the military. What else do you want? I want the TV to tell me that Joe Biden wasn't really president. If the TV doesn't say it, I can't believe it. The same is true about a lot of subjects. We're going to get to some of those today. But while we're on that particular subject, I found this really funny. Burning Bright actually sent this in one of our chats last night. This is from Zero Hedge, and it's a guest writer writing this article. Michael Snyder at the End of the American Dream blog. And we're just going to go through this quickly. I don't need to linger on this for too long. But the headline is, a conspiracy theory that is being pushed by the left claims that something really big is going to happen today. And this is yesterday. Most people on the right have no idea just how crazed many people on the left have become. Right now, a conspiracy theory which claims that President Trump is preparing to declare martial law in the United States is spreading like wildfire on social media. And while people might have no idea how crazed the conspiracy theorists on the left have become, people have also not really wrestled with the fact that there are still supreme normies all over the place. And I think we might be dealing with one of them here, but let's not focus on that. According to that conspiracy theory, a report will be submitted to President Trump on April 20th, which will recommend he should invoke the Insurrection Act to help deal with the border crisis. That would allow U.S. troops to help secure the border, but many leftists are convinced that President Trump will also use U.S. troops to round up political activists and send them to prisons in El Salvador. Now, that part is going too far, I would agree. He said, I realize this may sound really bizarre to many of you, but this is what many of them actually believe. And fine, believe whatever you want, guys. Figure the world out on your own. If you think that's where the information leads, more power to you. I don't think that the intent is to round up political activists, except when those political activists also happen to be illegal aliens. I cannot imagine he's just going to round up Antifa and ship them overseas, though. Would that be okay? I guess it depends what's been going on behind the scenes for the last few years. If they are talking about people who have been identified and confirmed as members of a domestic terrorist organization who were active in the United States throughout 2020 and prior, and less so since, obviously, well, then maybe exceptions can be made, especially if they are operating with foreign funding, et cetera, as many of them are, and they are subversives attempting to overthrow the United States of America. So, due process for sure if they're Americans, but otherwise. Early last month, an article that was published by the San Francisco Chronicle got the ball rolling by highlighting the fact that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security will soon submit a report to President Trump recommending whether or not to invoke the Insurrection Act. And so he grabs the appropriate section of the executive order. And let me just see. This is declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States. So a day one executive order from Trump. Within 90 days of this proclamation, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall submit a joint report to the President about the conditions at the southern border of the United States and any recommendations regarding additional actions that may be necessary to obtain complete operational control of the southern border, including whether to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807. Now, conspiracy theorists on our side of things still wonder if Trump may have invoked the Insurrection Act back in late 2020 or early 2021, perhaps that red folder during the very violent insurrection. Hard to say. The leftists called that an insurrection over and over and over and over and over and over again. And the mainstream media did as well. And by the way, a lot of Republicans did too. They called the very violent insurrection an insurrection, hence the name, very violent insurrection. Donald Trump has said many times over the years that the real insurrection was November 3rd, 2020. That may well be true. And Trump may have declared an insurrection. He might have invoked the Insurrection Act. All of this done behind the scenes in secret documentation or whatever. There's some indication that that's possible. Do we know that's true? No, of course not. Donald Trump did say many times that he was a wartime president, that the country had been attacked, etc. So every condition was already met, including the announcement by Trump on January 6th for the insurrection to disperse. So all of those conditions were met. Did Donald Trump invoke the Insurrection Act? We don't know. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Hopefully he did. We shall see. Because that would allow him to have done a lot more things than we are currently aware of over these last few years. And again, I think it was entirely justified. There was an insurrection. An election had been stolen. The media, along with systems of power in the United States, that old guard power structure, were installing a fake president and convincing the American people, this is your president. I don't know how much more insurrection-y you can get beyond that. But anyhow, so this is the executive order, and they have taken this to mean quite a lot. This is what they think is about to happen. This would be the plan once martial law is implemented. First, resist, demonstrations grow, justice plans, and there is a demonstration movement out there getting going. They were supposed to have a big weekend this weekend. Thousands of people showed up, not tens of thousands, maybe across the country. Certainly not hundreds of thousands, certainly nothing like we saw from the protests over the fake election, and not even what we saw by any stretch in early 2020 with the George Floyd riots. Will these demonstrations grow? Who knows? They're obviously organized. They're put together. Now the new thing is called the 50-51 movement. 50 states, 50 protests, or protests in all 50 states, 50 out of 50 states protesting, but just one movement, 50-51. Very lame. But of course, this is like leftist marketing strategy, and they probably think that it's very cool. And who knows, maybe there's some other numerology or symbolism in these numbers that I'm not aware of. Number 2, the false flag crisis turning protest into terror. Number 3, Trump declares expanded martial law and calls for militia to assist the police and military. Number 4, mass arrests of opposition leaders. Okay, totally down with all of this so far. Number 5, military and National Guard take over major cities. Maybe. Number 6, press censorship and total media control. Highly doubtful. I mean, they already think that they're being censored, even though they're the mainstream press. They think Donald Trump not allowing all of them into the White House press pool or briefing room the way they used to be allowed is censorship. We were actually censored, provably, by the state. And there was even another release last week. Tulsi Gabbard put out one of those releases from the director of national intelligence saying all the things that we know a bunch of years ago, but now it's news. Maybe that's a good thing, waking up the normies. Maybe it's a different script playing out, delayed intentionally, to keep people bubbled long enough so that the full plan can be implemented. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Got to consider both possibilities. Number 7, borders close and dissidents are trapped inside. Oh, dissidents are trapped inside. I thought the concern was removing American citizens and putting them in foreign prisons, which I would agree, that's a concern. You can't just have the president going around saying, that guy's got to go, that guy's got to go, that guy's got to go. I'm with you. But political dissidents trapped inside the United States because the borders are closed? What are they trying to escape for? I think that I could be considered a political dissident over the last few years. Right? I didn't try to escape. I kept speaking even though I was censored. These people are crazy. What are they escaping? That's the question. And then elections are postponed indefinitely. Well, here's the thing, commies. Our elections are already fake. So announcing that we're not going to have any more fake elections is not exactly the overthrow of government you're painting it to be. Our elections are fake. The results of the fake elections are the problem. The fact that we still allow ourselves to be ruled by the winners of fake elections is also a problem. But apparently, they are tuned in to some information. It doesn't seem like they're analyzing properly, but it's not like there's nothing to it, the way this normie author frames it. A lot of these things are at least potential. You got to consider that some of this stuff is possible. There have been signs in this general direction. And if we're going to strive for a goal, there's no point in striving for some like mid-level goal and determining that, it's just not realistic to get to the ideal goals. We should figure out what the ideal goals are and then strive for those. If everything has been inverted, if we suffer, as I believe, under a total inversion of reality that is projected onto us all the time, and its goal is to get us to believe everything is the polar opposite of what it is, well, then when we see our government destroyed in all these many ways, through all these many methods, we should figure out, okay, what is the destruction method? What is it down this vertical? What is it down this vertical? What is it down this vertical? Where are they trying to go? What's their furthest point out? If we can see those things represented in reality, we should be pretty well assured that that is actually the totality of their plan. That is actually what they're trying to do. You can see them talk about what their ideals are. You can see movement in the direction of their ideals. And you can at the same time see that one of the parts of the process to getting there is to invert all of the concepts in order to market what they're doing as good. And we are way down the path in that process. So we can see that in an extreme, if not final form, down a number of verticals. And when we see all that, then we should think, what is the actual definition of what they are trying to sell us? Because the inversion happens, and then they pursue the ideal by defining it as its opposite, okay? So racism is then good in that mode. Anti-racism, of course, is racism. Anti-white racism is good. We've seen that sold to us with major marketing campaigns for years and years and years. And you can go through any number of examples. I could probably, if I wasn't on a live stream and we were just having a conversation, I would probably think of new ones of these for hours because I've thought about it so much. If we are to go back the other direction and put the definitions back as they should be, and we're going to head in that opposite direction from where they're heading now, we should be able to figure out what the polar opposite is. What is the ideal form of the real thing as intended, as designed, as defined? What's the ideal form? Let's go after that, okay? We should be focused on doing that all the time. And instead, what we're often focused on is figuring out which things we're willing to support because they're comfortable enough and they're not going to require big change. They're not going to require our involvement to an extent beyond however much we wish to be involved. And that's a very human thing. It's also, in some sense, a practical thing. At some point, you're going to hit a wall and not be able to do anymore, and that's fine. You don't have to do everything. Nobody has to do everything. Nobody has to support everything. But we should figure out what those ideals are and be proponents of those ideals, not proponents of the half measures where we might end up having to stop, okay? Because striving toward the ideal is what keeps the momentum going in that direction, even when we hit that stopping point where practical concerns get in the way of further advancement, at least right now. And the communists understand that. They want to invert everything, and they don't stop halfway through and think, oh, you know what? We really have the racism problem in the United States. This is really not a big factor in anybody's lives anymore. So you know what? Thumbs up, we won that one. No. Struggle forever in that direction. That is what they do. And so if we're inverting things, we should at least be focused on the ideals. And if we're focused on the ideals, well then, political criminals, people who have committed crimes against humanity and crimes against America, at some point are going to have to be arrested. People who have propagandized the American public into making terrible and destructive decisions, at some point, have to be held accountable. And on many of these things, if the people aren't willing to themselves even admit, oh yeah, that's the problem, that person should be held accountable, then we're not going to get there. And that's part of the argument I've been making for many years now. And I think that we need to continue making that argument. But a lot of people have just reverted to the mainstream media at this point. It is amazing how much the truth community just mirrors what Fox News says at this point. Blows me away. Like all of a sudden, Fox is back on our side. And then, Bill Maher is interviewing Charlie Kirk. And they're like, oh, has Bill Maher changed? Is he coming around? Well, first off, I don't know. I wouldn't assume just because he's interviewing Charlie Kirk that he is. Gavin Newsom interviewed Charlie Kirk and he interviewed Steve Bannon. Charlie Kirk's the head of an info op. Why would you assume like this is proof of Maher's awakening? He's always been the edgy liberal. That's his brand. But the point is that when people who say we're the news now, their role in being the news now is sharing clips from mainstream media and pushing these people back up into the fore and saying, you know what? We had that 4 years where we couldn't trust you people, but now it's okay again. You're waking up the normies. That's always been nuts to me. Anyhow, that was a bit of a tangent. We should be focused on the ideals, and those ideals include a lot of the things that were mentioned in that Zero Hedge article. Now, I don't think they're going to go down the way that the leftists think they're going to go down, but some of those things do have to go down. So how are they going to go down? And if they don't go down, who would be satisfied? A lot of people are getting frustrated right now about the lack of arrests, and it seems like there's part of maybe a coordinated effort to be focused on that. We heard Steve Bannon going off about it last week on War Room. Then General Flynn posted about it over the weekend. People like Laura Loomer have been going off wondering where the action is from the administration. As I said on Devolution Power Hour Saturday night, I think that some of that's good because the people need to feel that. The people need to demand more so that they get more. And that's something we've talked about on the show for 2 years. If you're unfamiliar with my argument in that direction, you can go to the episode Demand Better, Get Better, I think is what it's called, and hear that in full. But I think all that stuff's totally reasonable. We should be pushing for those things. That's how it's going to happen. And the momentum needs to build. The public mandate has to be there on every part of this. And, you know, we should be cognizant of the fact that our consent is being manufactured much of the time. And much of that time, it's not on the basis of true stories. It's on the basis of psychological operations that nonetheless are believed as true by virtually everyone. And this is true of both sides, by the way. To think that some of the big stories in the media coming from particularly the establishment right, but even some of MAGA are not also psyops, I think is nuts. But the point is to be moving in that direction. And some of it, I think, there are signs that some of it is happening. You know, we heard a couple of weeks ago that Trump was directing troops down to the border. And of course, the assumption is that's going to protect us from that invasion. But at the same time, Trump has told us a month or two ago that the invasion is over. And we talked about that extensively on the podcast, so I don't have to go back into it. But sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. I checked the chat for 1 second, and sometimes I'm really good at reading things and maintaining my thought, and sometimes I'm terrible at doing that. And I guess that was one of those times. But yeah, troops sent down to the border. The idea is to stop the invasion, but the invasion's already been stopped, according to Donald Trump. So then what are they doing down there? And military operating on U.S. soil is one of these things that we've been told by our betters cannot happen, which makes no sense. And John and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on DPH. But if we're talking about ideals, the founders didn't want a standing army. Nonetheless, we have a standing army. If we're going to have a standing army, the standing army primarily should be used on our soil to protect our nation, unless we have empirical design, unless we have designed imperial. Oh man. It's been a few days since I've done a show. The brain's not firing the way it always is. I also didn't drink coffee today. I'm trying not to do coffee for a little bit. So I might be retarded for a little. I don't know. So if we don't have imperial designs, then we shouldn't need military bases all over the globe. Now, we might need a navy guarding our waters and our shipping routes. That makes sense if we're going to be involved in international trade. But the military should be totally empowered to defend the country against invasion. That is the number one responsibility for a military, one would think, under a proper system. And of course, this is one of the many inversions that we've been told, no, the military can't operate in the United States. That would be terrible if your government could use state violence against you. That's what we have the police for. And this is not an anti-police thing. I understand there's a lot of good cops doing an important job and saving people's lives. Cops have been helpful to me before. I have nothing wrong with cops. But I'm saying still that we have police forces in cities controlled by municipal corporations of those cities that are themselves controlled by corporations, more than we would ever think, by the way. I actually got ChatGPT to admit that not too long ago. Like, if elections are fake, and they are, it's really time to start wondering what exactly our reality is when it comes to the government structure and the places that we live. Because the big money in any place is going to control things. So why can't it control the media coming out of a city? And of course it can. And the corporations do that. And if they're paying for the political initiatives, and they're paying to lobby to get laws passed, and they are controlling the media that comes out of a given location, well, then who controls that location? I would argue that it's the corporation. And so you have police all over the United States who might get into the work, and many of them might keep the ethic of protect and serve. But what are they protecting and what are they serving? That's the question. There are always going to be forces within the United States that have that power, we would think, potentially. I mean, I don't know what the future would look like without any sort of policing, and I'm not sure that's a good future. I'm open to the conversation for sure. And I'm sure that people listening to this, some of you might have thought about this more extensively than I have. But really, what is the difference? What is the fear of the military that is not now embodied by militarized police forces all over our country? And ultimately, the military is here to defend the United States of America. So why wouldn't they be able to operate on U.S. soil, particularly when dealing with foreign invasion, or even, and I mean, this is the hazier argument, when there is domestic terrorism directed, funded, coordinated by foreign actors or actors on behalf of a global regime that has overthrown the United States, or even an illegitimate government. I don't know what the answer is, but these are questions that are going to be relevant in the future. And I don't think that we can just look to our understanding of these things as it was kind of indoctrinated into us to get us all those answers. I don't know. I did not intend to spend that long on that segment, but hey, I think that stuff's important to talk about. I definitely think it's interesting. I'm not saying I'm all the way there. You can tell that these thoughts are not entirely formulated at this point, but I think we have to be working in that direction toward getting a real grip on what this looks like. And I had a very similar conversation, by the way, at the last GART, I think. And I don't know if I've talked about it on here, but we were talking about how the movement toward privatization and reprivatization. And I think I've talked about that on here before. Scott Bessett's been focused on this at Treasury for a while, reprivatizing the banks, shifting away from state control. But what does that mean in a highly regulated industry? Okay. If Elon Musk is now the face of a Defense Department technology platform, and many of these other tech actors, these tech CEOs are similarly positioned, where the company is viewed as a private company and it's available on, or a public company, as it were, when it comes to the not privately held. It's just in the private economy, not part of the government. It is publicly traded. Okay, just to make that distinction. These companies are seen as private entities, not part of the state and not state agents, but they are state agents. They are Defense Department contractors at minimum, and the technology has been developed in coordination with the government. So does the government own that? And then when someone is placed as the face of that organization and it's privatized, if it's still highly regulated, if it's coordinated in some way by the government, what do we have? Okay. And if we think that that's a concern because some of this is too important and the government needs to be able to control it, or we need the government to seize these corporations because they've been involved in crimes against humanity, crimes against America, and the overthrow of the United States, well, then is that communism? It gets very hazy at a certain point. And it's one of those things that kind of bends your reality. Wait a second. Is it even possible to have a true split once you reach that kind of really upper level? And again, I don't know the answer. But speaking of the borders and what's going on down there.
The soldiers from Fort Carson, Colorado, using thermal and infrared cameras on the striker, watching for the tiniest movements along the border.
Even like a little mouse.
Up to a little mouse?
Yeah, up to a little mouse, like up to like a mile out.
With the strikers and soldiers, President Trump is creating a border barrier that is more than just a wall. He has now authorized the military to take control of a 60-foot strip of federal land along the border, stretching from California to New Mexico. Now, migrants would be crossing into a military installation. It would allow soldiers to make apprehensions, a job that, until now, has been reserved for the soldiers from Fort Carson, Colorado.
And that just began repeating itself. I mean, is it crazy to think that the military is being deployed in the United States? There's the military being deployed in the United States. I don't think it means they're going to be used against the American citizens, and certainly not to keep them trapped inside for dissidents. But hey, who knows? Maybe we'll get there someday. I don't know where this strange saga will eventually lead us, and by us, I mean probably you guys, but also me. I mean, I'm not going to shut up. So anyway, I see we've had some spam bots in the chat. I guess I should be complimented or something. This little show, really? Snowcat Operator donated 5 subscriptions. Thank you, sir. Let us continue. We will leave the leftist devolution behind and return to some Easter stuff. And if you noticed, sometimes I title the episodes before they begin. This is one of those days. It's called Done by Easter because I wanted to remember these particular videos from Donald Trump back at the beginning of the very deadly pandemic. This is
I hope we can do this by Easter. I think that would be a great thing for our country, and we're all working very hard to make that a reality. We'll be meeting with a lot of people to see if it can be done. Easter is a very special day for many reasons. For me, for a lot of our friends, that's a very special day. And what a great timeline this would be. Easter as our timeline, what a great timeline that would be. My first
and let's watch number 2
is to ease the guidelines and open things up to very large sections of our country as we near the end of our historic battle with the invisible enemy. We're going for a while, but we win. We win. I said earlier today that I hope we can do this by Easter. I think that would be a great thing for our country, and we're all working very hard to make that a reality. Is to ease the guidelines and open things.
So back in 2020, I'm sure that most of you remember those comments from Donald Trump in the context of the very deadly pandemic. It would be gone by Easter, and we would be able to open the country back up and go return to normal life. That didn't happen. But it's awfully interesting that all of what's happening is happening now. And it seems like we had a pretty significant weekend, and there's a lot of really kind of big picture stuff going on. And even with the very deadly pandemic, there was an interesting update, I guess you could say, on Friday. They took the covid.gov website that used to have information about where to get vaccines and seek COVID treatment and tell you about statistics and all the COVID bullshit. They took covid.gov, I can't talk right, and redirected it to a page at whitehouse.gov featuring Donald Trump up at the top with the massive heading, Lab Leak, the True Origins of COVID-19. The proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 publication, which was used repeatedly by public health officials and the media to discredit the lab leak theory, was prompted by Dr. Fauci to push the preferred narrative that COVID-19 originated naturally. The virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not found in nature. Data shows that all COVID-19 cases stem from a single introduction into humans. This runs contrary to previous pandemics where there were multiple spillover events. Wuhan is home to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has a history of conducting gain-of-function research, gene altering, and organism supercharging at inadequate biosafety levels. Wuhan Institute of Virology researchers were sick with COVID-like symptoms. It's very key that they say COVID-like symptoms. In the fall of 2019, months before COVID-19 was discovered at the wet market. By nearly all measures of science, if there was evidence of a natural origin, it would have already surfaced, but it hasn't. And of course, it never will. Now, we talked about this pretty extensively on Saturday night on Devolution Power Hour. So, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry and I did. I would encourage you to go listen to that if you want to hear more of that discussion, but I don't have to rehash all of it here. But the one point I do want to make is that going from one side of the controlled opposition dynamic to the other side of the controlled opposition dynamic is not the final goal. That is not the ideal that we are talking about that I was just discussing a few minutes ago. And this is the other side of the controlled opposition dynamic. The central narrative on COVID was that we had a very deadly pandemic that we had to mitigate in all these ways that don't work. If you don't mitigate in all these ways, then you are killing someone's grandma. And we are not going to be able to return to normal life until you get on board and obey. And the virus came from a bat in the Wuhan wet market. The central counter narrative was all of that same stuff. We have a very deadly pandemic. It needs to be mitigated in these ways. If you don't obey, you're killing someone's grandma. We're not going to be able to go back to normal life. Everyone has to obey. But it was created in a lab. Now, there's an important difference between those two. One of them makes the whole thing sound like it just came up out of nature, and there was no possibility for intent. The only ill intent was from the people who wouldn't stand 6 feet away and wouldn't put the mask on. In the lab leak version, we have multiple levels of evil intent, one being dual use research of concern, where they are actually creating bioweapons and then telling the public, actually, it's so we can create vaccines that prevent whatever bad thing might occur if someone created this exact bioweapon and then it got released. We got to be able to figure out how to prevent something like that from happening if we, create something like that happening. So that's bad. Then you move on to the possibility that it was released intentionally. And that's obviously much worse, because then that's the deployment of a bioweapon. And the idea is that China would have been the country to deploy this against us, against the rest of the world. I don't think there's any reason to believe that China deployed a bioweapon against the entire world. That seems utterly insane. Now, is it possible that the global regime would deploy a bioweapon against the entire world? Yes, it is. And we have the proof of that in their vaccine programs, in big pharma programs in general, the way they make and process our food, etc. Okay, so there's obviously a global regime effort to kill or destroy millions upon millions of people all around the world. I don't think anybody should possibly doubt that at this point. And by the way, if you can't kill them because that's too obvious or something, well, maybe you'll just sterilize them. Or maybe you'll create a society where no one, except for the desirable people, is able to reproduce. Okay? So the agenda is there on the part of, I should say, the global regime. And I'm not saying that there aren't elements in China who would be on board with that. There are elements right here in our country that are on board with that. And I think that those people should probably be arrested, even if they're trying to flee and even if by the military. But that's still not the ideal, okay? And this is a good waypoint. I hope that it sparked some conversation around, the family gatherings over the weekend. And hopefully it was not the cause of, too much animosity. But it's good if people are talking about it. Eventually we have to get all the way there. But that's still only a half measure. That's still only halfway there. We don't have to promote this as good when we know that it's not ultimately sufficient, because the lab leak theory still contains all the important aspects of the central narrative. That's the point of controlled opposition. You give multiple brands of the same thing so that everyone will accept one version of all the stuff you need them to accept. Okay? The natural origin theory is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. Okay? For people who want to continue trusting the state, even while the state is just overtly failing right in their faces. And the lab leak theory is the spoonful of sugar for all the people who don't want to trust the state, but still don't want to dissent from the mainstream understanding of the very deadly pandemic as real, deadly, very transmissible, possible to mitigate with social distancing and lockdowns and masks and vaccines and the medical protocol. Did they reveal to us that the medical protocol was actually a killer too? I don't think that remdesivir is mentioned in that COVID document. Let me see if I can. Nope. Not on the front page. I think that there is a long report. Well, I might as well just let me open this up and just see if I can find the words remdesivir. I don't want to give them. No. The word remdesivir does not appear in the 557-page long Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic report. Okay? Now, of course, the Congress is feckless, illegitimate, useless, and powerless. So I wouldn't expect much more to come from them than this. A bunch of limited hangouts like we've had for the last 4 years plus. We had a bunch of hearings that came to ultimately nothing. Maybe we'll have some evidence on the record. I don't know. We can be hopeful about these things. Maybe they woke up the normies. I don't think so. I think they were limited hangouts. Twitter files, limited hangout. January 6th on both sides, limited hangout. What hearings were productive? We don't need to rah and make sure that we're rah-rah-rahing for a bunch of congressmen who cannot even prove that they were legitimately elected. Okay? Doesn't matter that they have an R next to their name. Donald Trump can say he needs their help 1,000,000 times. And it doesn't mean that we need to defend them when they are feckless, useless, potentially playing for the other side. It's not anti-Trump to be like, hey, seems like the Congress isn't really getting the job done. Seems like a pretty natural sort of admission that we should be able to make by this point. So ultimately, the goal has to be beyond where this limited hangout, and it's on whitehouse.gov, Trump's right up there at the top, makes it seem like it's a Trump-oriented lab leak report, but it's not. It's the congressional subcommittee. And maybe it's got Trump's stamp of approval. Maybe not. I don't know how the process went down. But even if it does, it's not all the way there, and it's okay to say that. The reason it's important to know that it's not all the way there, is that the pandemic program can still be run on us again and again and again. Now, they've been very bad at running them. The monkeypox thing didn't convince anybody. No one was really scared by that. Part of it was because it was a gay thing, and part of it was because everybody knew that it was maybe an immune reaction from the vaccine, etc. But the pandemic, the ability to run a pandemic narrative successfully, I don't know if that's gone away. Maybe you're more optimistic about it than I am. I think there's a chance that they might not be able to pull it off. If they tried, everyone would be like, this is bullshit. Hopefully. We've seen a few indications that that might be true, monkeypox being one of them. On the other hand, if Trump did the same thing that he did in 2020, where he sometimes called it a hoax and then sometimes took it seriously, the same truthers who are re-obsessed with watching Fox News and playing the match game online, they're going to say, trust Trump. This time it's real. And where will we be? So I don't think we have to worry a lot about pandemic narratives being run on us, but we should be worried about limited hangouts and why we're getting these limited hangouts. This is one of the regime's existential threats against humanity, these pandemics. We talked about it last week or maybe the week before. I think it was last week with the Ray Dalio video. Okay? He's talking about these potential threats to come that we have to be prepared for. One of them is pandemics. Well, if you know that pandemics are bullshit, then pandemics can't threaten you. Okay? You can't, it's not possible to scare an entire society of something they don't believe in. Right? If we're talking about, what was that horror movie? The Babadook. This like mythical horror figure, scary monster thing. Okay? Think of any monster movie. All right? I'm not scared of Godzilla. How about that? I'm not scared of the Babadook. I'm not scared of what other good movie monsters are there? I'm not thinking none of them are immediately coming to mind, except for really stupid ones. I was gonna say I ain't afraid of no ghosts. But hey man, I don't know. I can't claim to be an authority on the existence and or threat that ghosts pose. But also we have a Rumble rant from Polymath Anon in the chat. APL goes rah, 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 just saying, oh yeah, she is cheering her ass off on a regular basis. They say she's getting a lot done. Is she getting a lot done? That's the question. I think the answer is probably not. But she's getting exactly as much done as Republicans in Congress got done the 4 years prior. And what did they do the 4 years prior? Well, they had a bunch of hearings so that they could produce internet content along with their uniparty left counterparts. And they claimed to pass budgets. And many of them actually tried to make it much, much harder for the public to stay on board with Donald Trump. So, don't know what to tell you about the feckless, useless, illegitimate, ridiculous Congress. Naturally, as you might suspect, the mainstream media was not happy with Donald Trump promoting the lab leak theory. This is the Associated Press. Trump turns a COVID information website into a promotion page for the lab leak theory. Okay, fair enough. That is a fair headline. He did do that. Hold on here. I just wanted to, here we are. The website used to feature information on vaccines, testing, and treatment. And then down here at the end, they have to remind us that actually COVID is still really deadly. And so people need that information. about 325 Americans have died from COVID per week on average over the past 4 weeks, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. As of April 5th, less than a quarter of adults in the U.S. have gotten an updated COVID vaccine. Millions worldwide have had long COVID, with dozens of widely varying symptoms, including fatigue and brain fog. Well, I have both of those things today, and it's just from not drinking coffee. As far as long COVID goes, give me a break. I mean, still, really? And whatever happened in 2020, and I'm not suggesting, by the way, the COVID pandemic narrative was absolutely a hoax, okay? There wasn't a viral pandemic spreading in our midst. If there was, people would have been dying in the streets or dying at home. They actually tried to show us people dying in the streets in China, but instead, people only died at the hospital after receiving the deadly medical protocol or already dying from numerous other things. And they just happened to also have a COVID diagnosis, which means they either took a test that didn't work or were just diagnosed likely COVID based on their symptoms, which were flu-like symptoms. And the flu disappeared. I'm not saying the flu is real either. Might not be. Might just be a reaction. Flu deaths might be a reaction to the flu vaccine every year. We should at least be open to that possibility. If there was a real pandemic and that pandemic came into the country in the fall of 2019 and we did not close down anything until at least the middle of March of 2020, well, that's 3.5 to 4.5 plus months of zero mitigation with zero knowledge that the very deadly pandemic was in our midst. So at some point, while the virus spread, it would have had to become more transmissible and or more deadly. And those aren't and it only becomes more transmissible. It doesn't become more deadly. So that's how viruses work. They tell us as it evolves to continue spreading, which means that it reduces in its deadly. What is the word? See, I'm like, I can't think of the word. I know there's a word. I know that word. Why isn't that word coming to me immediately on recall? Virulence. I think that's it. I'm not sure how well I said that. I think I said it okay. Anyway, that would decrease over time. So if the virus got in the fall of 2019, then that should have been the deadliest point. But it wasn't. No one was dying. We had concerts. We had sporting events. We had bars. We had restaurants. People were allowed to go to the parks and the beaches. People were allowed to go to work. They were allowed to keep their small businesses open. No masks, no social distancing, no vaccines, no nothing. And nothing happened. No one had any idea that a pandemic was in our midst. But then a pandemic was in our midst. Months and months of warnings. Now we have the proof that it was already there and nothing happened. So was that a real pandemic? No, it could not have been a real pandemic. All right. We can move off of the very deadly pandemic talk. Oh, one last thing to mention. If only a quarter of adults have gotten an updated COVID vaccine, that is a massive number of Americans realizing that COVID wasn't deadly. Vaccines don't work. Vaccines might be very dangerous. That's extremely important because the social incentive and punishment structure set up around vaccine acceptance and vaccine usage throughout that period and since makes it really hard for people to adopt to change views, let's say. So if you got a vaccine in that first round, and they tried to tell us that something like 75% of people got it or something like that, if you went and got it and then you stopped getting it, you had a realization somewhere along the way, okay? And that realization is critical because that's something that you have been forced to change against the commands of authority and against the incentive structure, the social incentive structure set up. Back then, you weren't allowed to go visit your grandma if you didn't get a vaccine. I know people who tell me at least, well, yeah, I got it because I wanted to go visit my grandmother. She's dying. And so, you know, this is what makes my family feel comfortable. Terrible idea. I got it so that I could keep working. Terrible idea. I got it so that I could travel. Terrible idea. Okay. So to then go and reverse that decision for a lot of people, that is the kind of awakening that we want to see on a number of issues. So that I think is extraordinarily significant. And just another one of those kind of indirect proofs that the divide that we are told exists in the country is not nearly what we are told it is. And I think that, you know, the lack of participation in these commie rallies that they have seemingly every weekend now should be additional proof of that. And I think that it's important to understand that there are these indirect proofs for some of the success of the movement broadly that are just available out there that are never going to show up in fake news polls. So, and by the way, along the lines of fake news polls, I would assume that if they're saying 25% of adults have gotten an updated COVID vaccine, it's probably far fewer than that. In the chat, Caramaga, $5, APL. Okay. Got to give the people what they want. Let's continue. So, the big news of the day is that the Pope has been announced as dead. We are told that he died just today. It's very difficult to know if that's actually what happened. This is what he was doing yesterday. He was greeting a visitor, the so-called Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. And here are some pictures. J.D. said, "Today I met with the Holy Father, Pope Francis. I am grateful for his invitation to meet, and I pray for his good health. Happy Easter." And J.D. Vance identifies as Catholic. There he is, just overjoyed, I guess. There he is, asking the Pope if he has apologized even once. And there he is, getting a souvenir and marveling at it, I guess. Is that a tie? What is this selection of items on this tray? Anyhow, the Pope looks very lively right here. Or, I mean, as well as you can expect for a man 88 years of age. But not too long after, I guess that initially it was called respiratory illness, and then I think they went beyond the claim of respiratory illness. Let me see what the updated cause of death is, and we'll watch this in the meantime.
Pope Francis was a pope of firsts. He was the first pope to come from Latin America, first to choose the name St. Francis of Assisi, and he was the first pope to come from the Jesuit order, a Catholic religious group known for its service to the marginalized. When Francis was elected, he was an outsider to Rome, and he quickly shook up the Vatican and church establishment. He was a disruptor who called on the church to return to its core mission, welcoming everyone, serving the poor, embracing humility. Francis himself adopted a simple lifestyle, refusing to live in the papal palace. But what did he actually achieve? Well, Francis issued landmark teachings on protecting the environment and working with other faiths. He was a tireless voice for peace, demanding the end to possession of nuclear weapons and abolishing the death penalty. And looking to the future, he called for a treaty to regulate the development of AI. He also shifted the Church's approach on LGBTQ+ Catholics by offering blessings to same-sex couples. And he appointed women to senior positions in the Vatican. More than anything, however, Francis reformed the papacy. He was a people's pope who shunned the trappings of office and sought to mobilize all Catholics in the Church's mission. Now it is up to the Church's most senior figures, the cardinals, to decide who comes next. One thing is for sure, Francis' successor has big shoes to fill.
And we've gotten coverage very much along those lines from the mainstream media and the cable networks today. Pope Francis is far more controversial than they just outlined there. The cause of death apparently is now claimed to be a cerebral stroke that led to a coma and irreversible cardiocirculatory collapse. His death certificate and multiple Vatican statements detail that this acute event was compounded by a history of serious health issues, including acute respiratory failure from bilateral pneumonia with multiple microbial infections, chronic bronchiectasis, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. This courtesy of Perplexity, the machine. And apparently he was hospitalized for 38 days earlier in the year due to that pneumonia and other related complications. So he was alive and greeting J.D. Vance, and now he is dead. And a lot of people think that he might have been dead for a long time or some considerable amount of time. Also interesting, he didn't live the same place the rest of the popes lived. So they have an excuse about why that was. Who else didn't live where his predecessors have lived? That would be the fake and illegitimate President Joe Biden. Got to kind of wonder if the Pope Francis, is the Joe Biden of the papacy. Just saying, some weird stuff's happening, and we're going to talk about some of it. Because I love talking about weird stuff. What are we going to do? Just track the mainstream media narrative every day and be like, oh, yeah, you see, they're wrong on Twitter because of this. What's the point? This is from Hello Magazine. I've brought this up so many times over the past couple of years. The Queen greets Liz Truss at Balmoral. So this is September 6th of 2022. There's the Queen greeting Liz Truss. The Queen is apparently 3'6" by this point. And 2 days later, they announced that she had died. That hand is not looking healthy, but again, 2 days from death, but still totally well enough to be in this getup and meeting a woman who is easily twice her size, according to this photo. Liz Truss was prime minister for about 6 weeks. The Queen had to approve of the prime minister in order to be appointed. That's what the monarch does with the Commonwealth countries. We're told it's just a ceremonial figurehead, but if you can approve the appointment of a leader of a nation and you can veto any laws that nation might pass, you're not really just a ceremonial figurehead, except to the extent you're the ceremonial figurehead of the British Crown, which is the global bankers in the city of London. And they are a ceremonial figurehead as far as that is concerned. But they do have some sort of, I don't know if I'd call it real power, real political power, but it's some sort of power. So anyhow, we also went through Jimmy Carter. I think it was that the 4th of July last year? Jimmy Carter, or Labor Day or something, I want to find when this Jimmy Carter thing was. I didn't think to pull this up, but it's kind of worth it just to have the visual proof. Sometimes I think of my logical train and I say to myself, I'm just going to say that. But then I remember when we're live and we have the video, we might as well show the images. Ah, yes, here we are. Oh, it was his 100th birthday when they had the flights overhead. Ah, yes, here we are. Perfect. This was CBS News last October on X, formerly Twitter. So they wheeled Jimmy Carter out. They have these big events to give proof of life, and then they announce a death. And so J.D. Vance's visit yesterday and the Pope's Easter appearance, those are proof of life. And now we have the announcement of the death. So these things there's kind of a trend on these things. And I know it makes some people uncomfortable. They're like, well, you can't prove he was dead. You're right. I can't prove it. Can't prove it. I can show you that this stuff is very, very weird. They're just working right up till the last day. Sure, he was hospitalized for 40 days or whatever it is. In any of these instances, this is not some new idea, okay? And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, same thing. A lot of people thought that she was dead for a lot longer than we were told. Or I should say, I guess that's a correct way to say it, but she was dead well before they announced her death. Does that sort of thing happen? I kind of think that it does. And there's a lot of symbolism in the announcements of these deaths. There are news cycles centered around these deaths. They are stories that provide distractions occasionally. I mean, the Pope is everywhere today. Let us continue. This is what J.D. Vance had to say. For processing. Oh, and by the way, while we're on that subject, here is video of the news accidentally announcing the Pope's death prior.
Meanwhile, the Pope's festive address focused on his prayers for the pandemic to come to an end. He said vaccines should be made available to those most in need. His death was announced,
What do you make of that? I don't know. Then, of course, there's the famous video of the Pope glitching out, disappearing in the window. And I don't know what to make of that one, to be honest. There are, of course, fact checks and debunkings. And one of them has a different video angle and just shows the Pope walking down the stairs. Now, people are like, yeah, but that's a hologram and it's on one angle and not the other. All right. I don't know. Is the technology there to do that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure the technology is there to do that. Would they do that? Yes. Is it helpful for them to be able to display these characters? Yes. Okay, I get it. I understand the argument. I don't know that it's right. It's something to keep in mind. I don't go all in on it. Was the Pope dead for a while? Maybe. Anyhow, and we'll get back to that in just a second too, by the way. Just make sure I'm still going in the right order here. I think we're good. All right. So this is J.D. Vance's statement. He said, I just learned of the passing of Pope Francis. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. I was happy to see him yesterday, though he was obviously very ill. But I'll always remember him for the below homily he gave in the very early days of COVID. It was really quite beautiful. May God rest his soul. Okay. Now, we'll just read the introduction to that homily. And the Pope Francis, was as much a tool of the global regime as you could ever possibly find. He pushed the regime agenda at every turn. And again, the COVID thing was bullshit. When the evening had come, the gospel passage we have just heard begins like this. For weeks now it has been evening. Thick darkness has gathered over our squares, our streets, and our cities. It has taken over our lives, filling everything with a deafening silence and a distressing void that stops everything as it passes by. We feel it in the air. We notice it in people's gestures. Their glances give them away. We find ourselves afraid and lost. Like the disciples in the gospel, we were caught off guard by an unexpected, turbulent storm. We have realized that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented, but at the same time important and needed. All of us called to row together, each of us in need of comforting the other. On this boat are all of us, just like those disciples who spoke anxiously with one voice, saying, "We are perishing." So we too have realized that we cannot go on thinking of ourselves, but only together can we do this. Now, some interesting language in there, for sure. But that message that we all need to be doing the same thing in response to the very deadly pandemic was as destructive a message as you could find anywhere. That was the problem. Everyone going along with the program and obeying was the problem. And J.D. Vance just said that message is beautiful. Now, through the rest of the message, the Pope says that we should not be fearful. So we should all be in this together, but we should not be afraid unless we need the fear to get you to all be in this together, right? Because the fear was the motivating factor in anyone going along with any element of that process, even if it was just fear of the social blowback for dissenting or for not complying with the mitigation demands. I don't know how that statement's lovely. I mean, hey, man, everybody's like, well, he's just saying the right thing because he's Catholic, and maybe. I don't know what to make of these sorts of things, but you got to explore the possibilities. I read the statement this morning in full. I can't get on board with that. Perhaps if it was a real disease, but it wasn't a real disease. Okay. And we know how the mitigation steps were laid out. Are we going to pretend that the globalist head of the Vatican wasn't involved in any way, had no foreknowledge whatsoever of the pandemic agenda as it was being rolled out by all his partners in globalism? I don't buy that for a second. I don't know why anyone would, to be honest. And if we're just playing at the level of this is all narrative and JD is just doing his part in the narrative, well, okay. We should all do our parts in saying, I don't believe that bullshit on television. And I'm going to call you a liar until you stop lying. I don't know why that's so controversial, by the way. Like, pointing out that liars are lying used to be what the truth community did. And now what the truth community does is giggle while playing the match game and being like, look at the psyop. It's just like we were told it was going to be. The point's getting out of the psyops. I don't know why. I don't know how that is viewed as standing up for the American people, by the way. Isn't it like a little embarrassing at this point? Apparently not, because people are like, oh, dude, check this out. Okay, I'll check it out. Wow. Evergreen. It used to mean that a boat with container ships or with a boat with those shipping containers containing children was stuck in the Suez Canal. And now it means Andrew Jackson's tree at the White House. Whoa! Check it out. Apparently, there's still a big appetite for that stuff on the internet, I guess. Steve Bannon, yesterday on Getter. I wonder what time this would have been yesterday that he posted this. It says April 20th. Was he announced dead last night? I thought it was not until today. Oh, apparently it was last night. I guess I was off on the time. 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned home to the Father. Okay, so I don't know how that's April 20th. Just don't get it. Bannon said fake Pope. And Joe Biden was a fake president. So is he being serious? Is this just a euphemism talking about how that relays the fact that Steve Bannon doesn't think of Pope Francis as a real Pope or a Catholic Pope? I mean, it's funny. The old joke was, well, is the Pope Catholic? Like, to denote something obvious. And there are people who would argue that this Pope was actually not Catholic, which is pretty funny. One of the people who is in greatest opposition to Pope Francis was Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. And here is Francis from a couple of months back here's Vigano from a couple of months back arguing that the Pope was already dead.
The contradictory updates being given about Jorge Mario Bergoglio's medical condition cast a disturbing light on the way Vatican communications are being managed. There are those who believe that the Pope is already deceased, and that this fact is being kept hidden from the public. It is clear that the Vatican and the Bergoglian Deep Church are in a panic, and we do everything to gather the consensus of the cardinals together around the name of someone who will continue the Bergoglian revolution. There are those who have every interest in burying their own crimes, along with those of Bergoglio, while in the United States there is a head-on clash of the U.S. Bishops' Conference against the Trump administration, after the scandal regarding the funds of the Agency for International Development, USAID, has brought to light the complicity of the Catholic Church in the lucrative business of immigration. It is necessary to prevent the progressive hierarchy from ensuring that one of their own is Bergoglio's successor, that is, another usurper on the throne of Peter will be their heir and continuator of the previous one. Before hammering the final nails into Bergoglio's coffin, it is therefore essential and urgent that the light be shed on the usurpation he perpetrated and on the occupation of the Catholic Church by a corrupt and treacherous hierarchy whose sole aim is to destroy her from within.
That's powerful stuff. And it sounds a hell of a lot like what we dealt with here in politics. A usurpation. They thought that Pope Benedict was removed before his time, that there was that there were systems of power pushing him out, replaced with this fake Pope who didn't even live at the right place. And he mentioned there the lucrative business of immigration. It ain't just immigration, it's human trafficking, and it's also child trafficking. And of course, Vigano is, I think, responsibly using a euphemism there. But that doesn't mean that we have to. Jay gifted 5 subscriptions. Thank you, sir. Let us continue. A little bit more Vigano. This is what he had to say today. In 2018, Eugenio Scalfari, I suppose that's probably an Italian name, reported the words that Bergoglio supposedly confided to him about his vision of the afterlife. Sinful souls are not punished. Those who repent obtain God's forgiveness and join the ranks of souls who contemplate him. But those who do not repent and cannot therefore be forgiven disappear. There is no hell. Sinful souls simply disappear. These heretical ravings are directly opposed to the Catholic faith, which teaches us that there is a particular judgment for everyone, which Bergoglio could not escape. His soul has therefore not disappeared, nor has it dissolved. He will have to account for the crimes he has committed. First of all, having usurped the throne of Peter in order to destroy the Catholic Church and lose so many souls. Or he says loose so many souls, which could mean that he has caused people to leave the church. Maybe that's a way that Catholics think of this thing that I'm unaware of. And if you're Catholic in the chat, let me know. But if this non-pope and anti-pope can no longer harm the mystical body, his heirs still remain. The subversives who he has invalidly created cardinals and who have long been organizing themselves to ensure a continuator of the synodal revolution and the destructuring of the papacy. In support of them are also the conservative cardinals and bishops who have been careful not to question the legitimacy of Jorge Bergoglio. It is on these people that the greatest responsibility for the outcome of the next conclave falls. Okay? And so that was from this morning. Now, again, if you substitute Bergoglio, Francis, for Biden, and you're talking about how all of these people that align with his political agenda are supporting him, but the real focus is all these people who supposedly oppose him, but don't really. Again, dead on with the situation we deal with here. And of course, Francis was aligned with Obama, was aligned with Biden. One more video from Vigano. My pal Pepe Lives Matter put this up today on X, formerly Twitter, and he is now UltraFrog17 on there, and it's Green Lives Matter, just FYI. He says, excommunicated Archbishop Vigano knew exactly who the Pope really was, a Jesuit Freemason working hand in hand with Klaus Schwab on demolishing the church according to the whims of the deep state. He was not a friend of the world. The Pope wanted the Great Reset, but they were stopped. Is it a coincidence that Klaus Schwab stepped down right as the Pope died? Very interesting indeed. And that's some of the other news today, that the World Economic Forum has now officially accepted and announced the stepping down, the resignation of Klaus Schwab. That was kind of announced that it was in the offing a few weeks ago, but now it is official. Klaus Schwab no longer heads the World Economic Forum. He is out the same day that Pope Francis is announced to the world as dead. Both of them age 88, which is interesting to some people based on the symbolism of 88s, and ties into Nazism, which would describe certainly Klaus Schwab and perhaps the Argentinian Pope. Donald Trump has been using 88 many, many times over the last few months. So coincidence? Maybe. Interesting coincidence? Think so. Pepe Lives Matter says, listen closely to Vigano. And I think Vigano's just going to say this here, so I don't need to read the quote. Maybe we'll come back to it.
The fourth revolution terrorized by Klaus Schwab and the family of international finance find in Bergoglio not a neutral spectator, which would itself already be an unheard of thing, but actually a zealous cooperator who abuses his own moral authority in order to support Ad Destra, outside the church, the project of the dissolution of traditional society. While ad intra, within the church, he pursues the project of the demolition of the church in order to replace her with a philanthropic organization of Masonic inspiration. And it is scandalous. This applies to both, to civil and ecclesiastical world, confirming the pactum celere, the criminal conspiracy between the deep state and the deep church. It seems to me that in this conspiracy, the role of the Jesuit has been decisive. It is no coincidence that for the first time in history, a religious of the Society of Jesus is seated on the throne of Peter.
Right back to it again. The Jesuits and the Jesuit influence is certainly an interesting subject, as is this one right here. This is from 2017, and I actually found this a few months back when I was still doing the Hindsight show on Badlands. And, I spent my weekends throughout that entire period just reading, trying to figure out what all the biggest stories were from first in 2020 and then in 2017, and going through all the stuff that I thought was signal for now. And I came upon this article in the New York Times. 10 centuries later, a pope and knights do battle. And I'll just leave this here. I excerpted a few bits, and I'm not going to bother going down and finding them here. But it began as a fight over staffing. Then came a dispute about condoms, followed by papal concerns about Freemasons. Now it has become a full-scale proxy war between Pope Francis and the Vatican traditionalists who oppose him, with the battlegrounds being a Renaissance palace flanked by Jimmy Choo and Hermes storefronts on Via dei Condotti, Rome's most exclusive street. The palace is the headquarters of the Knights of Malta, the medieval Roman Catholic order. For months, an ugly, if quiet, spat over staffing simmered behind the order's walls before spilling across the Tiber River to the Vatican, setting off a back and forth between the two camps. Francis and his lieutenants sent angry letters. The knights ignored them, claiming sovereignty. This past week, the dispute finally blew up. Fed up, Francis took the extraordinary steps of demanding the resignation of the order's leader, a decision the knights officially accepted Saturday, and announcing that a papal delegate would step in. Conservatives promptly denounced what they called an illegal annexation and ideological purging by a power-obsessed pontiff, while liberal observers saw the whole episode as resulting from an act of subterfuge by the Pope's most public critic within the Vatican hierarchy, Cardinal Raymond Burke, an American. Very interesting. A seemingly obscure intra-Catholic squabble had erupted into an unexpected shock to the church with ideological fault lines running to the top of the Vatican. Now suddenly he is more politically isolated. The election of President Trump and the rise of far-right populists in Europe have ushered in an angrier era and emboldened traditionalists inside the Vatican who sense that the once impregnable Pope could be vulnerable. And so remember, this is back in 2017. The Knights of Malta is a bastion of Catholic tradition, founded in the 11th century by Amalfian merchants to help Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. It later became a military force, defending the faith during the Crusades and eventually holding off the armies of the Ottoman Empire from its fortress in Malta. The group, now with a wealthy and aristocratic membership of elite Catholics who parade in ornate raiment, has more recently specialized in aiding refugees and the poor in more than 100 countries. And we are coming to have a new understanding of what aiding refugees entails. And worth noting as well that I believe people discovered a few weeks ago that John Roberts was part of the Supreme Court Justice. John Roberts was part of, or is part of, the Knights of Malta. Until this past week, the order was led by the conservative and elaborately titled His Most Eminent Highness, the Prince and Grand Master of the Order of Malta, Matthew Festing of Britain, a former Sotheby's representative who had taken a monastic oath. Long building tensions between Mr. Festing and the order's Grand Chancellor, Albrecht von Boeselager of Germany, whose father participated in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler, escalated in recent months amid accusations that Mr. Boeselager had knowingly overseen the distribution of condoms as head of the order's charitable arm. Into this volatile situation stepped Cardinal Burke. In 2014, Francis had demoted Cardinal Burke, a leader of the church's traditionalist movement, from his position on the Vatican's Supreme Court. The cardinal supporters say Francis did this because of Cardinal Burke's opposition to the Pope's tentative opening to the possibility of allowing divorced Catholics to receive communion. And to wrap that up, the commission ultimately ruled that the Pope did have authority over the Knights of Malta. So it was ultimately decided by an abstract power projection struggle over whether or not the system of rules that they created allowed them to make changes at this other organization. When they're going by, and we're going to talk about their rules that they make up in just a second. And what do you make of systems of rules that don't actually have to be followed when confronted with real power? Why are they followed at all? Especially by people who dissent from the structure of those systems of rules. So, let us continue. I thought that was very interesting, though. So the Pope, while he was there, also just replaced the leader of the Knights of Malta. All these various interactions and conflicts they inform what the underlying story is. And I think that the underlying story is a lot deeper than this was the Pope and now he's dead and I guess we'll find a new Pope. But in terms of finding a new Pope, this is the Daily Mail this morning. Now for the world's most secretive vote, with 120 cardinals locked away for the legendary conclave. The world is about to witness the process of choosing a new Pope, or rather not witness it, because as the Oscar-winning film Conclave makes clear, the election of a new Pope is the most secretive democratic process in the world, conducted by 120 cardinals behind closed doors. In fact, the film shows it as being more open than it really is, in that the president of the College of Cardinals briefs the world's media while the process is underway. In real life, he would face excommunication for that offense, as would anyone breaking the rules, which also include not making pacts with other voters. Nor would a dead pope be allowed to be swarmed over by priests, nuns, and officials, nor laid out in his pajamas. Okay, so they're talking about the movie there. There's also an HBO series called The Young Pope, starring Jude Law, and then eventually, why can't I think? John Malkovich as well. Very, very interesting series. Very, very well done. Probably offensive, and I would not, for that reason, recommend it if you are a conservative Catholic. But one of the key sequences in that show was the selection of a new pope and how the voting and the back and forth on all that went. Now, not collaborating with other voters, making pacts with other voters, forming little internal cabals. I have a hard time believing that that's actually forbidden. I would suspect that, as with any system of power at the top levels, the rules ultimately are irrelevant and the power struggle is all that remains. But when you have to communicate those decisions to the public, then there has to be an interpretation of the rules as structured that was conformed to in order to provide that public legitimacy. In the real world, Camerlengo, or Chamberlain, of the Holy Roman Church declares a pope to be dead in the presence of the papal master of ceremonies and a handful of other members of the papal household. 9 days of mourning are then declared, in which the body of the late pope will lie in state in St. Peter's Basilica. It will be at least 15 days before the conclave. Literally, cum clave, which is Latin for with key. To choose his successor begins. So 15 days before the conclave to choose his successor begins, allowing for cardinals to reach Rome from all over the world. Cardinals, though, are no longer physically locked in a building until they have made their decision. They will stay at a guest house within the Vatican's walls known as St. Martha's House, where they will have the services of cooks and housekeepers, plus 2 doctors, one of whom is a surgeon. Given the age profile of cardinals, that may seem inadequate, although those over 80 are not allowed to vote. And I think that that is pretty key, and I'll tell you in a few minutes why I think that's so. So how Pope Francis' successor will be chosen. The College of Cardinals will meet in Rome to choose a successor. The conclave follows precise rules. Only cardinals under 80 are allowed to vote. The ballot will not take place for 15 days. Okay, so that's a restatement, but here we go. Who will be voting? Of the 252 living cardinals, 138 are under 80 and therefore eligible to vote in the conclave. So this is the visual representation, and this is why I chose this article. That is a big chunk. Is that more than half? Yeah, that's more than half. So it's just about 138 out of 252 are eligible to vote, which I guess means 114 are over 80 and therefore ineligible. So it's already just a little more than half the cardinals. And I thought this was really interesting when considering Bannon calling him a fake pope, the similarities between what's happening in the formal Catholic Church relative to what happened during the, some might say, devolution term of Joe Biden, the fake and illegitimate president. Polymathanon just said in the chat, you need 2/3 for confirmation. So you're saying that among those 138, you would then need 2/3 of the 138 to be confirmed as Pope? I think that's what you're saying. But I found this really interesting. I looked this up. I had the machine figure this out for me today. ChatGPT says that 12 cardinals celebrated their 80th birthday in 2024. We've already had 4 this year. In 2023, there were 11. In 2022 and 2021, there were 6 each. And then in 2020, there were 4 once again. So, actually, they did that wrong and redid it. I want to make sure that I'm giving you proper information. They undercounted 2020. So 2020 was 7, 6 in 21, 6 in 22, 11 in 23, 12 in 24, 4 in 25. Okay? So that is 30 plus 12 plus 4. So that's 46 of these cardinals have turned 80 and become ineligible to vote since 2020, which I think is really interesting. And maybe we would even have to go back even further to see if some of them have outlasted their time. It's been noted that Bergoglio put many of these people in place. Steve Bannon had Liz Yore on War Room today. Liz Yore is his go-to for all things happening in the Catholic Church. And her number one thing is the opposition to human trafficking and child trafficking. And so she had a lot to say. She did multiple segments. I'm just going to play one of those. But I would encourage you, if you're interested in the subject, to watch War Room this morning.
Man, that every single file of every predator that has been protected and elevated by Francis is exposed. Let's expose every Freemason who is a cardinal. Let's expose the entire word for word and 3 iterations of the China agreement. Let's expose that to the world. I mean, this is the time for, the Catholics are supposed to have a voice, right? Isn't that what Francis says? We're now supposed to be the synodal church. Well, get your voice and start fighting, because, this is what the deep state is afraid of. They've had the moral voice of Francis for the last 12 years, Steve. And they have used it in climate change, in migration, in the transgender, in abortion. He has served as their moral voice. Well, no more. He's now going to be judged by God, despite not believing that, there's hell. Francis, thinks there's no hell. It is time now to, a Doge moment for the church? Yes. Open up the files. It is time to get rid of the filth. And by the way, that Vatican Bank, which was supposed to be examined by internal and external auditors and never was because Francis closed it down, let's open up the Vatican Bank and let's see the $2 million a year or $2 billion a year grant from the Chinese Communist Party to the Holy See. Enough is enough. If we're not going to fight this battle, then we ought to just submit to the deep state.
I'm 100% down, and we got to expose Parolin. Parolin is the top candidate right now. He's the guy that cut the deal with the Chinese. He's the worst of the worst in the henchmen, and also McCarrick's guy. We ought to open up all the files of McCarrick and all these guys. They have to be opened up, and people got to say, hey, here's whoever was responsible. You finally got to open up and say, hey, let the chips fall where they may.
Right.
Because there's going to be some questions going back into John Paul. There's going to be some questions going back into Benedict. There's going to be some questions asked about people that look the other way. Well, you got to do it. How did McCarrick become the Pope of America? How did he become so powerful? A guy that ended up laicizing. Yes, ma'am.
And the ultimate question for our country is, did McCarrick and the Obama and Biden administration play a role in the color revolution of the Catholic Church? That is a defining question. If so, every single act, word, document that was produced by Pope Francis is null and void. Was there a color revolution in the Catholic Church coming out of the administration of Obama and Biden?
Hang on one second. We're getting to more of that. In fact, our color revolution expert.
So Liz Yore believes that there was a color revolution staged against the Vatican. And the beneficiary of that color revolution was Pope Francis. And she's saying that everything that he has done as Pope could be nullified. It would be null and void if they get to the bottom of this. Let's go back to that Donald Trump post from the beginning. Is it crazy? It might be crazy, but it's right there. I just want to highlight this and then I'll pull it up. This is what we read earlier. To him and to the person that ran and manipulated the auto pen, perhaps our real president, and to all of the people who cheated in the 2020 presidential election in order to get this highly destructive moron elected, I wish you, with great love, sincerity, and affection, a very happy Easter. Okay? So, Joe Biden, dementia, we heard that story. That's one of the elements. Auto pen is another element. Both of those things would make all of the things that Joe Biden signed null and void. The spending, it's all ridiculous debt that will never be paid in the first place. So whatever. Any of the laws, any of it. Joe Biden nullified Bye-bye. Gone. He was not a real president. She's saying the same situation could be true in the Catholic Church at the Vatican, that there was a color revolution that installed this fake Catholic, this Jesuit Freemason, and that period is now over. Guess we'll see what happens in the future. I'm sure there's ample effort to put another globalist there, but if this is what's going on, then obviously that's not going to happen. And who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? We never know with these things. It seems like somebody great will be next. That's how the trend kind of feels. Seems like people are demanding that. But who knows? Maybe you need another stand-in. Anyway, very, very interesting regardless. Big Gouda in the chat pointed out a book, and I had a look at that right while that video was playing. And the book is called Rulers of Evil, Useful Knowledge About Governing Bodies by F. Tupper Saucy. And I went ahead and found a PDF of that online. It looks like it's very interesting. He says about it. Where was his post? Here. Oh, he just says it now costs $450 on Amazon. But anyhow, these are kind of like the big picture books that I really think are quite interesting. Anyhow, I am putting that up on the information stream on Telegram, t.me/very reasonable. So you can go search for Rulers of Evil on there and download the PDF if you like, because $450 on Amazon sounds rather steep. But if you want the book, obviously, and I like books better, go check out eBay or something. Find one out there floating around. Get yourself a copy. Apparently, it is really good. Okay. So I think that's all I have on the Vatican. But no, it's not. I have Trump's response, and then we will have a perfect segue. This was Donald Trump this morning. Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him. And then later in the day, he said, and you actually heard him describe this in the video at the beginning, as a mark of respect for the memory of His Holiness Pope Francis, by the authority vested in me as President of the United States by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, I hereby order that the flag of the United States shall be flown at half-staff at the White House and upon all public buildings and grounds, at all military posts and naval stations, and on all naval vessels of the federal government in the District of Columbia and throughout the United States and its territories and possessions until sunset on the day of internment. And Trump is intending to attend Francis's funeral. I also direct that the flag shall be flown at half-staff for the same length of time at all United States embassies, legations, consular offices, and other facilities abroad, including all military facilities and naval vessels and stations. So that's a lot of places to fly their flags at half-mast or half-staff, as he says, for as long as it takes to intern the Pope. And I think I read that was Friday. I don't know when that is going to be. And if you have it in the chat, by all means, go ahead and hit me with it. In my Telegram chat, some insightful people pointed out that it is interesting when considering the division of church and state, that all of these government buildings throughout the country, throughout the world, the American flag will be flown at half-staff because of the death of a pope of the Catholic Church. It's a very interesting symbol, very interesting statement by the president to be able to do that. Maybe people are going to have an issue with that. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll see protests to it. Maybe we'll see people not wanting to do it. I don't know. But an interesting observation nonetheless. Trump said this yesterday on Truth Social, which I found particularly interesting in light of the announcement of the death of the Pope. He said, the golden rule of negotiating and success, he who has the gold makes the rules. Thank you. Now, another thing that there's no way to prove, conspiracy theory through and through, at least no way to prove yet. But there were many stories years back, and, you know, they're all quote unquote debunked. So believe them or not, I don't know what the right answer is. There were videos that went viral on the internet of supposedly a blackout of the Vatican. And the story that went along with that is that the gold from the Vatican Bank was all seized and brought back to the United States. Is that a conspiracy theory? Well, certainly a conspiracy theory. Is it correct? I have no idea. It's just interesting with the timing that Trump makes that statement. And at the same time, gold continues to hit all-time highs, as it did again today. Gold surges to a record above $3,400 as Trump threatens Fed independence. And so this is the excuse. This is also the excuse for the weakening dollar. But as we went over last week, the actual reason for the weakening dollar is that the administration desires a weakening dollar. It's not that Trump is threatening Jerome Powell. That's not what's weakening the dollar and making gold go up. It's, I guess, ancillary, part of the same mix. But the weakening of the dollar is fully intended in the Mar-a-Lago Accord program. Gold prices broke $3,400 on Monday, hitting a new record as President Donald Trump's threats against the Federal Reserve's independence and his tariffs shake investor confidence in the U.S. economy. Gold futures jumped 2.91% to close at $34.25.30 per ounce, with investors buying the precious metal as the dollar hit a 3-year low. And I just wanted to see what the Bitcoin price was today. It is hovering in the 87,000 range. And Bitcoin's been hovering in that general range for quite a while. But gold is spiking right now, which is very interesting. And if you follow the show for many years, you know that I'm a proponent of Bitcoin, and I'm also down with precious metals. I have some silver. I don't really have too much gold, but there's a lot of smart people out there who like it, okay? My Bitcoin maxi friends think it's a waste of time, that everything goes to zero against Bitcoin. Maybe in the future they'll prove to be right. Right now, it's at least in the mix, and it's interesting in a narrative sense, if nothing else. So is there a Vatican tie-in on the gold? I don't know. But that's an interesting statement from Trump, knowing that announcement, I think we can at least say that we could imagine he would get access to that sort of announcement before our mainstream media would. Now, let me just check the timing on that. So that was 3:09 p.m. yesterday in the U.S. I guess that would have been before Pope Francis technically died. Let us continue. So let's go. I'm just editing on the fly here as we go through the order of things. I brought this article up briefly on on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday. Trump wants to fire Fed Chair Powell. Kevin Warsh may be the one to replace him. So we've heard a lot about potentially getting rid of Jerome Powell. And Trump has been pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates. Scott Bessent, in an interview last week, was talking about how Treasury has a number of tools to deal with the problem if Jerome Powell refuses to act. And then the idea, I think that, I should have grabbed this article. I think John grabbed this article. But the idea that a new Fed chairman would be named in the near future, making Jerome Powell a lame duck until his term expires in 2026 if Trump would be unable to remove him. Now, unable to remove him is maybe not the right way to say that, because I would think that Trump is probably in some much stronger degree of control over these situations than we would ever be led to believe by the mainstream media. But putting a new person out there and that person having a certain set of views, or that person making statements while Powell is still in there, that would create enough tension and conflict to maybe force action. Who knows? Regardless, he's kind of clipping the wings of Jerome Powell one way or another. And Kevin Warsh seems to be, or at least according to this article, seems very likely to be that guy. I think it's interesting, especially because his name comes up now as a plan like that is beginning to become public. So CNN says the leading contender to lead the U.S. central bank under Trump, whether at the end of Powell's term in May 2026 or earlier, reportedly appears to be Kevin Warsh, a former Fed governor who previously was under consideration to be Trump's Treasury Secretary for the president's second term and was a candidate for the top job at the Fed during Trump's first term. CNN previously reported that Warsh was again on Trump's shortlist to become Fed chair this time around once Powell's time is up. In fact, Trump's selection of Scott Bessent to lead the Treasury Department was seen by many as a way to leave Warsh open for an eventual appointment as Fed chair. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Bloomberg earlier this week that the administration will start interviewing candidates for Powell's successor sometime in the fall. And with speculation swirling over whether Trump will try to oust Powell before his term ends, Bessent said that monetary policy is a jewel box that's got to be preserved. And then there were some statements from Warsh down here at the bottom. He said that the Fed should steer clear of political prognostications, not just in word, but in deed, pointing to minutes from a Fed meeting last year indicating officials believe Trump's proposed policies could fuel inflation. And of course, we were alerted to all of that last year. It seemed like the Fed was focusing policy on around making it harder to get Donald Trump elected. In an interview with Fox Business ahead of the Fed's latest policy meeting last month, Warsh said the turmoil sparked by Trump's tariff war indicates an economy that is transitioning. The president inherited a fiscal and economic and regulatory mess, and it's going to take a little digging out to be on a stronger platform for growth. Rome wasn't built in a day, so this will take some time. And I'm sure there's no connection there, for real. When asked about the likelihood of Trump's tariffs stoking inflation, Warsh said that inflation is a choice, and the Fed has made a lot of bad choices over these last several years. The president has to take matters into his own hands and try to kill inflation by reducing government spending. So he seems to be on the right page with all of this stuff. Will he be the guy? Of course, I don't know, but an interesting indication of where this thing is headed. Now let's come back just a bit to another Trump post in light of the Vatican and in light of Klaus stepping down. And it's hard to know if this is related, but it is related in the dimension of time, if nothing else. This was Trump yesterday. The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but rather by those who watch them without doing anything to stop them. A point well taken. Now, speaking of evil, do you know how evil tariffs are? Tariffs, according to The Atlantic, are Hitler. Hitler's terrible tariffs, by seeking to liberate Germans from a globalized world order, the Nazi government sent the national economy careening backwards and drove the price of eggs 600%. Drove up the price of eggs 600%. That is really something. Trump has remarked multiple times about the price of eggs. He talks about it all the time. And he says, I don't know why they're focused on the price of eggs, but hey, it's the price of eggs. And usually the things he's saying about the price of eggs don't actually indicate what's going on with the price of eggs. So, reference to this, I have no idea. Just saying. Just saying. And let's just go through, I don't think we're going to go through all of this, but, you know, the drama coming out of The Atlantic. When I read the headline, I was like, oh, that's a David Frum piece. Somehow it's not. From almost the moment Adolf Hitler took office as Chancellor of Germany, tariffs were at the top of his government's economic agenda. The agricultural sector's demands for higher tariffs must be met. Hitler's economic minister, Alfred Hugenberg, declared on Wednesday, February 1st, 1933, just over 48 hours into Hitler's chancellorship, while at the same time preventing harm to industry. Foreign Minister Konstantin von Neurath was concerned about lumber imports from Austria and a 200 million Reichsmark trade deal with Russia, with several trade agreements about to expire. Hitler's finance minister, Count Johann Ludwig Graf Schwerin von Krosigk, wow, insisted, I almost wanted to say it again because it's so fun. Count Johann Ludwig Graf Schwerin von Krosigk, that's quite a name, insisted that immediate decisions needed to be made. Hitler told his cabinet he had only one priority: to avoid unacceptable unrest in advance of the March 5th Reichstag elections, which he saw as key to his hold on power. And of course, that's because he was replacing someone. Hitler had what one might call a diffident, occasionally felonious disregard for financial matters. He owed 400,000 Reichsmarks in back taxes. His understanding of economics was primitive. You have inflation only if you want it, Hitler once said. Inflation is a lack of discipline. I will see to it that prices remain stable. I have my SA for that. The SA, or brown shirts, were the original paramilitary organization associated with the Nazi Party. Hitler held Jews responsible for most of Germany's financial woes. And if there's one thing we know, that is not true. Yes, global bankers did destroy Germany's economy, but only some of them are people who call themselves Jewish. I mean, it's most of them, but they're Khazarians. They're not actually Jews, probably. But, I mean, you know, the banking regime is the banking regime. In his address, Hitler declared that the entire country needed to be rebuilt after years of mismanagement by previous governments. He spoke of the sheer madness, I'm skipping down to the end, by the way, of international obligations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, of the need, and that is one of the ways they destroyed the economy, of the need to restore life, liberty, and happiness to the German people, of the need for cleansing the bureaucracy, and that's in quotes, to know, so that you know, he's definitely talking about the ethnic cleansing of the Jews. He's not talking about getting rid of all the people who are operating on behalf of anti-German organizations. And I'm talking about this mostly in parallel. I don't want to make a statement there about what was happening in Germany, but it's clear that this author wants the parallel to be drawn between Trump and Hitler. And Trump, of course, is always in the Hitler role. And so when Trump talks about draining the swamp, clearing the government of the deep state, clearing out these uniparty actors in the global regime, are we going to think of that as a cleansing? Is that an ethnic cleansing in any way? And the answer is, of course not. And that will remain true even if the bulk of people removed are minorities because of DEI hires or people who happen to be Jewish or happen to identify as Jewish. But continuing. Public life, culture, and the population, every aspect of life. So cleansing the bureaucracy, public life, culture, and the population, every aspect of our life. His tariff regime, he implied, would help restore the pride and honor of German self-reliance. Never believe in help from abroad, never on help from outside our own nation, our own people, Hitler said. The future of the German people is to be found in our own selves. Hitler did not refer specifically to the trade war he had launched that afternoon, just as he did not mention the rearmament plans he had discussed with his cabinet the previous day. And that is a very, very devious literary sleight of hand to say that he did not mention the trade policy, but he still meant it, just as he also meant this other thing he didn't mention. Even if it was true in one case, that wouldn't mean that it's true in both cases, as though everything he didn't mention was true. That doesn't make any sense. Billions of Reichsmarks are needed for rearmament, Hitler had told his ministers in that meeting. The future of Germany depends solely and exclusively on the rebuilding of the army. Hitler's trade war with his neighbors would prove to be but a prelude to his shooting war with the world. And of course, Trump has talked many times about rebuilding the military. And so the question is whether or not tariffs are Hitler. Are tariffs Nazi policy? No, obviously they are not. If Hitler did tariffs, that does not in itself mean that tariffs are Hitler. That's nonsense. It's crazy. Also, through my reading of The Transfer Agreement by Edwin Black, a Zionist, the book is in its third edition release. The epilogue to the book is written by Abe Foxman, who was the head of the ADL and is like an American Zionist Jewish icon. So it was the most acceptable official story of the transfer agreement, Havara, which was the partnership between Zionists and Nazis that was set out to confiscate Jewish property, hold that property, and then transfer it back to the Jews in another form after they had been sent down to Palestine to settle the global regime proxy state of Israel. That's just what the deal was. You can read it at any length in the book. It's like a 500-page long book. Read the book. It's actually a really interesting read because you're like, wow, this is so crazy. This book is saying so many things that we were told just simply were not true. It was just mind-blowing to me. Many of the pages of this book, I was just like, wow. If I view that through the understanding I have of how regime overthrow works, of how color revolution works, and I apply the same playbook to what I'm reading about Germany in the 1930s, I have to reconsider everything that I was taught in my state education and in my college education that was not at a state school, but was still partially funded by the state. So what can you say about that? Regardless, totally mind-blowing. But throughout that book, it was very clear which methods, and it's discussed at long length, which methods were being used by Jewish global governing bodies, of which there are multiple and still exist, to subdue the Nazi regime before partnering with it. And the way that it ultimately comes out in the book, my reading, is that those methods to subdue the Nazi regime were primarily leverage to be held over to get a better deal, because the deal was going to go through no matter what, because they wanted the Jews in Europe to be moved down to Israel, just like now they want the Jews in Israel to be moved back to Ukraine. And throughout the reading of that book, understanding that in the background, it became very apparent that those means of leverage were exactly what I have been describing as the regime overthrow scenario over this past year. They want control over media, control over finance, control over resources, control over trade routes, and then ultimately it becomes a military thing if force has to be used. So, tariffs, as we have talked about many times, disrupt the top-down centralized control over the world economy. That is the worst possible thing from the perspective of the global regime, because that causes the system to break down. Okay? So if they have control over the world's economy and one country decides not to play along, well, then what do they do? And this was the leverage play throughout the book. One of the biggest issues in that book was whether or not there would be calls for a worldwide boycott against all German goods. Okay? And you can't ship into Germany. You can't take stuff out of Germany. That was one of the biggest leverage plays throughout the entire discussion, throughout all of the negotiations for Havara. What would happen? What would these Jewish global governance organizations decide with the bankers, because the bankers had to oversee the confiscation of property and then the returning of that property in some form after the relocation to Palestine. These are the means of leverage, and they were used, and that's what led to World War II. And they're bringing this back in parallel right now, and they are trying to make Trump Hitler, a case I've been arguing now for year after year after year after year. And many establishment Republicans are more than happy to go along with that, because they are going to be the rug pullers ultimately. Okay? Once everybody steps on the rug, then they're like, ha, we're stepping off the rug and we're going to pull it out from under you. So they go hard on immigration, wokeness, and a range of other issues that align with MAGA. We're not upset about dealing with immigration. We don't want the wokeness, the DEI, etc. But they focus only on stuff, because that stuff has been made so extreme that opposing it is totally acceptable all across society now. Opposition to woke and DEI is totally acceptable. They accept it on the Daily Weimar, like the Fox News and the Blaze and all of them. Anti-woke, anti-woke. Ron DeSantis' campaign, anti-woke. J.D. Vance is pretty anti-woke. Donald Trump is anti-woke. I'm not saying he's pro-woke. I'm not saying he doesn't talk about it. I'm just saying there's a whole range of MAGA issues that the Republican establishment doesn't touch, but instead goes hard, super hard, after all of those issues. Now, all of those issues will be the issues that are used to paint Trump as Hitler and us as Nazis in the future. They'll say they're racist. Look at what they want to do with the DEI thing. These were the people opposed to our Black Lives Matter movement. Think about how the history will be recorded and seen in 50 years or 100 years when someone is looking back and the fake news of today is the history of the future. Okay? And so they look back and they say, oh, yeah, that was the MAGA movement that was opposed to all that stuff, because the Republican establishment will have already pulled the rug and gone back to join their uniparty left brethren back within the comfort of the controlled opposition dynamic. People think I'm crazy to worry about the neocons as much as I do, and to worry about the Republican establishment and the tech libertarians as much as I do. This is why, okay? If you want to, at some point, lose a narrative war that should, by all measures, be easily won, it will be because you eventually stopped fighting, thinking that everyone who claimed to be your ally was actually your ally. And I think that there are few things more dangerous we could do than that, ultimately. Let me see what else I have here. I don't want to go into a huge... Let's do a couple more economic things. Okay. So this was Scott Bessent. Hold for processing for just a moment. To wrap that up, tariffs. They're not Hitler. Should you kill tariffs as a child? You would never want to let tariffs grow up and do all the terrible things they're doing. Here's Scott Bessent.
The other side of the wall, I never really liked the term fake news. Now that I am on the inside and I can see what they're reporting, I think the term fake news probably isn't strong enough. It's really not. That they start with an a priori, they've written the story, and then they just kind of shape shift facts to back into it, because many of the stories that I've been involved with are just so far off. There was a story in the New York Times the other day that talked about 50% headcount decreases at the IRS. Nobody's talking about that. These were on background. These were not named sources. And they're just trying to stir tumult during taxpayer filing season. I mean, it's crazy.
He thought it was fake news, but the fake news is not a strong enough term. And there we have the fake news trying to frame tariffs, which is just economic leverage and bilateral relations between our country and another country, as equivalent to Hitler. There's going to be another Holocaust because of tariffs? Doubt it. I don't think that that's going to happen. This is from CNN. Or I'm sorry, this is from the National Pulse. India takes Trump's lead, imposes tariffs to block cheap Chinese imports. So apparently, Narendra Modi, who is meeting with the non-successor J.D. Vance today, I guess J.D. flew from Italy to India. He is also Hitler. Indian Hitler, I guess we have here. Look at that. How about that? Orange American Hitler and brown Indian Hitler. Amazing. I didn't know so many people could be Hitler, but apparently they are. India is set to impose a temporary tariff of 12% on steel imports, aiming to counter a significant increase in low-cost steel products from China. The action, referred to locally as a safeguard duty, is intended to take effect promptly. As the second largest producer of crude steel, India was also a net importer of finished steel for the second straight year during the 2024-25 fiscal year. Preliminary government data shows that steel imports climbed to their highest level in 9 years, reaching 9.5 million metric tons. Skipping down. There is clarity that the duty would be 12% and a decision is expected at the earliest, an Indian government source said, regarding the anticipated adoption of the GTR recommendation. Okay, so India is pursuing the same decoupling from China with the same product that the United States is. Is Narendra Modi also stupid? Because Donald Trump, tariffs, it's going to wreck the economy. He's stupid, therefore. Is Narendra Modi Hitler? Because Donald Trump is Hitler for tariffs. Why is it okay when everybody else tariffs? Why is it not Nazi Germany when other countries impose tariffs? It's very confusing. I wish I had an answer. I don't know the answer. Let us jump down to some fun stuff here. Let me see if I can. Here we are. Wait, pause for 1 second. I'm sorry about the delay in processing here. I just realized I grabbed not the proper link, but a sublink. There is a spat between Nayib Bukele and Nicolas Maduro. And we have talked about many spats between various parties and Maduro, most particularly the Elon Musk spat. Because I can't find one of those other links, let's just go to the tried and true Badlands Media. Bukele proposes prisoner swap with Venezuela for political detainees. In a post addressed to Maduro on X, Bukele identified journalists, opposition family members, and activists swept up in Venezuela's electoral crackdown last year, accusing the government of jailing them solely for challenging alleged election fraud. He named 252 Venezuelans deported from the U.S. and detained in El Salvador, and proposed repatriating all of them in exchange for the release of an equal number of political prisoners in Venezuela. The individuals Bukele listed included the son-in-law of former Venezuelan presidential candidate Edmundo Gonzalez, several political figures taking refuge in the Argentine embassy, and 50 foreign citizens reportedly detained under Maduro's regime. He also named the mother of Maria Corina Machado, a prominent opposition leader, whose home was reportedly surrounded by Venezuelan police in January. Bukele said he would instruct El Salvador's foreign mission to open communication with Caracas. Later that night, Venezuela's prosecutor's office dismissed the proposal as cynical, labeling Bukele a neo-fascist and demanding detailed information on the detainees' identities, legal status, and medical conditions. That's very interesting. So we've had the back and forth. This was... Here's some more context. The Guardian: Venezuela accuses El Salvador of human trafficking as prisoners caught in row between authoritarians. Or I guess that's caught in row between authoritarians. Venezuela's chief prosecutor has accused El Salvador's president of being a tyrannical human trafficker after Nayib Bukele offered to exchange the 252 Venezuelan migrants deported to his country's prisons by Donald Trump for the same number of political prisoners in Venezuela. Bukele made the offer on Sunday night in a message addressed directly to his authoritarian counterpart, Nicolas Maduro. And yes, of course, Maduro's the authoritarian. He said, "I want to propose a humanitarian agreement that includes the repatriation of 100% of the 252 Venezuelans who were deported in exchange for the release and delivery of an identical number of the thousands of political prisoners that you hold," El Salvador's leader posted. And isn't that weird? 252 is the same number of cardinals in the Vatican, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to pull that back up. Yes, it is. 252 living cardinals. And I don't know if you can call them political prisoners just for being at the Vatican, but that would probably be a little dramatic. Hours later, the proposal was rebuffed by one of Maduro's top allies, the Attorney General Tarek William Saab. In a televised address, Saab claimed the Salvadorian's cynical offer exposed him as a narcissistic neo-Nazi. So now he's not a fascist, he's a Nazi. And sometimes those are basically made equivalent. All collectivism is ultimately equivalent. So he called him a narcissistic neo-Nazi who had kidnapped more than 250 Venezuelan migrants sent to a maximum security jail in El Salvador by the Trump administration since mid-March. Bukele is a serial human rights violator, Saab said, pointing to the politician's horrifying 3-year, quote-unquote horrifying, 3-year anti-gang crackdown, which has seen at least 85,000 Salvadorians thrown in jail, largely without due process. And it goes on with many of the same details. Chatham House, the globalists at Chatham House say the idea that there would be a prisoner trade should be loathsome to anyone who actually cares about human rights. Quite a statement. Now, if you asked me to guess, I would suggest that this is all a stage play. And that, as we've seen multiple times, Nicolas Maduro believes that the Tren de Aragua people in the United States were brought there by the fake and illegitimate President Joe Biden, but more specifically by the FBI and the DEA. Is that true? I don't know, but I think there's at least some good reason to believe that. And if we think about good twin, evil twin in every country, there are certainly factions in the United States that oppose Nicolas Maduro, but yet work with their counterparts in Venezuela who are not Maduro's counterparts. If the evil people in the United States, if the evil twin faction in the United States was working with Maduro, why aren't they working with Maduro? They oppose Maduro, and we've seen that in numerous venues. And I would suggest to everybody, if you haven't read the crisis group report on Venezuela, just look in the info stream on Telegram. Maybe I can just pull it up right now. I think I have this like permanently in my... It's called Imagining a Resolution of Venezuela's Crisis from the International Crisis Group, on whose board Scott Bessent used to sit, by the way, and still controlled by the Soroses, international banking and finance, international energy resource companies, and all sorts of American deep staters. These people were figuring out in this report, plotting how to take over Venezuela's electoral system and then replace Nicolas Maduro as fast as possible. So how could it be the case that those people are desperate to remove Maduro, but also bringing in the Tren de Aragua people, as Maduro claims they are, and simultaneously, I should say, if the Tren de Aragua people, if all these bad people were actually on the side of Maduro, which would be suggested if he wanted to actually prison swap with them. Maduro's opposition may be imprisoned. I don't know. But to the extent they are, they were involved with the global regime in trying to overthrow the Maduro regime. What is he supposed to do? And we saw the color revolution tactics. We know the tactics. We know they tried to put a Joe Biden in office with a Kamala Harris, who's Maria Corina Machado, right under him. Like that was the woman. Everybody liked the woman. Elon was advertising that woman. Equivalent to Kamala Harris. Edmundo Gonzalez, equivalent to Joe Biden. So we see the same program being run there. And we're still supposed to believe that the man who the international media calls the authoritarian dictator is the bad guy in the situation. And so I don't believe that Bukele is a bad guy, although he might be. I don't think he is, but I'm open to anything. It seems far more likely to me that they're playing out the same stage play Maduro has played out with Elon Musk and others in the past. And when we're talking about these Tren de Aragua people that Maduro claims were brought to the U.S. by Joe Biden, and certainly to some extent they were with the immigration program, but that they were being protected, that was his claim, by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the FBI. Let's go to Breitbart. New Mexico Democrat judge resigns after ICE arrests alleged Tren de Aragua gang member in his home. A Democrat judge in New Mexico resigned from his bench last month after immigration agents arrested an alleged Tren de Aragua gang member living in his home. The illegal alien entered the U.S. in Eagle Pass, Texas, before being released on an immigration payroll due to overcrowding. He eventually moved to New Mexico. Federal prosecutors in the District of New Mexico allege that 23-year-old Christian Ortega Lopez was illegally in possession of a firearm and has ties to the hyper-violent Venezuelan gang. And so apparently this is the judge just hanging out. I guess that's a backwards peace sign. Hanging out with his gang member pals. It's almost like there's something else going on at a higher level with this whole Tren de Aragua thing. And that maybe what they are protecting is not anything more than their own interests when it comes to all of these people who are part of the global criminal enterprise and have been protected by members of the American government for a really long time. And let's just read Nicolas Maduro's response here. This is from the Tupi report on Telegram. The Nicolas Maduro regime reacts furiously to Nayib Bukele's proposal to exchange imprisoned Venezuelan criminals in CICOT for political prisoners. This was here's the full statement translated. In response to the cynical statement made by President Nayib Bukele, in which he reaffirms that 252 Venezuelan citizens illegally deported from the United States are arbitrarily detained and in a condition of forced disappearance in a concentration camp of that country, we wish to denounce the following. Bukele's statement, who makes his worldwide debut in this way as the most faithful exponent of 21st century neo-fascism, demonstrates that these citizens are kidnapped at the unilateral disposal of an individual outside the law who publicly and through media declares to the planet that he tyrannically decides who may or may not enjoy life in freedom in El Salvador. As we explained in a letter addressed to the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, the treatment received by Venezuelans in the United States and El Salvador constitutes a serious violation of international human rights law and amounts to a crime against humanity that mimics the repugnant Nazi practices of the mid-20th century. For this reason, I am now sending communications to the Attorney General of El Salvador and the Supreme Court of that country, questioning them on A, what crimes have these Venezuelan citizens committed in El Salvador? B, when were they presented before a judge? C, have they had access to a lawyer? D, have they been allowed to communicate with anyone since the moment of their detention? As Attorney General of Venezuela, I immediately request the full list with identification of all those kidnapped and their judicial status, as well as proof of life and a medical report for each one. The entire world should be appalled by the fact that CICOT is no longer a torture center created by Bukele's macabre mind to punish criminals in his country, but rather a site of forced disappearance of innocent Venezuelans, according to arrangements with his imperial partners, whom, as an expert in human trafficking, he uses to receive millions of dollars in return. What has been stated above demands that all international organizations call for the immediate release of our compatriots who are now vilely kidnapped by a tyrant, and that they proceed to sanction this criminal conduct, which violates the most sacred principles of international coexistence, justice, and peace. And so that is the Attorney General of Venezuela. Now, a really interesting post that caught my eye and kind of wrapped all this up for me today is this one from General Flynn commenting, and we'll get to that comment in a second, but I just first want to bring up what he's commenting on, which is this post from Kash Patel, where Kash says, Tren de Aragua is an extremely violent, highly organized transnational gang. The FBI assesses some members of the Maduro regime have links to TDA members who look to use those ties to advance their criminal objectives. We stand by this assessment and consider TDA's presence a direct threat to our national security. Together with our law enforcement partners, we are actively working to identify, disrupt, and dismantle their networks. We will not allow foreign-backed criminal organizations to take root in our communities. Okay, so that's Kash's statement. And then in response, General Flynn said, Tren de Aragua is a foreign terrorist organization directly backed by elements inside the Venezuelan government. The global alliance facing America today consists of a combination of nations and groups led by China. They're aligned with Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, radicalized Islamic terrorist organizations, and an assortment of criminal enterprises. This is what America faces. It was during both the Barack Obama and Joe Biden regimes where these relationships were promoted instead of dealt with. Donald Trump, as well as all of America, must now deal with them. Otherwise, we stand to lose everything. And there is a global alliance facing America. The good thing is that there are also elements within all those places that are not opposing the America of Donald Trump and the American people. There's the good twin faction. There is the evil twin faction. And I would suggest that, I would guess that the Attorney General might be part of that evil twin faction. And that is all represented as the Maduro regime's response. But now that I think about it, it sounds like it might be just the response from that Attorney General, the way we might see. And Venezuela has like a shadow government as well. And we saw that under Juan Guaido. The regime set up a parliament there and tries to put all of their rules in place, just as they do in any country. So it's going to be interesting to unwind this. But there is a layer deeper than that which we are seeing from the mainstream media in their coverage of all of this. And it's a very interesting dynamic developing between Bukele and Maduro that we're going to have to keep an eye on, or at least Bukele and Venezuela. We will see if there are, I will give another look and see if there are direct comments from Nicolas Maduro. And with that, I think that I am going to probably wrap it up for today. Scanning the chat. I hope you guys all had a good time hanging out. I see the chat has been lively and the spam bot problem has seemed to subside. So with that, I will be back on Wednesday for the subscriber stream. I'm going to just put it on normal Rumble. It's not going to be on Rumble Premium. So you can watch on Rumble. You can watch on Substack. And I'll be back on Wednesday, 6 p.m. So, you know, same reasonable time, whatever. Same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.